The wind had that kind of chill that feels personal, like it remembers who you used to be. I was walking back under the bridge, the same way I do most evenings, when the city starts to put its noise away and the silence comes out to feed. That's when I saw it. A wallet, half buried in a puddle, edges swollen from the rain, leather cracked like an old confession. I would have passed it by. People drop things here all the time. Bottles, wrappers, pieces of themselves. But something about it stopped me. Maybe the way it lay opened, like it was asking to be noticed one last time. I picked it up. Inside, 2 crumpled $1 bills, damp but still clinging to their color, and a small folded note, pressed flat where an ID should have been. No credit cards, no photos, no name, just the note. The paper was soft from being handled too much. The ink bled slightly, but the words were still clear. For the man who once helped me when no one else did. Jay. That was it. I stood there in the half-light, reading it again, slower. It wasn't a goodbye, wasn't a thank you. It was something heavier, something that carried both. I looked around like maybe someone would come running back for it, claiming it, explaining it. But the street was empty. I don't know how long I stared at the note. The $2 fluttered in my hand when the wind pushed through, like they wanted to leave too. I'd been called a lot of things in this city. A beggar, a ghost, a problem, but never the man who helped. Not for a long time. I went back to my fire under the bridge, the one that keeps the cold from asking too many questions. The wallet sat beside me, dripping quietly, the note tucked safe inside again. The bills steamed slightly in the heat, smelling of rain and something older. Benny showed up, as he always does when silence starts to get too thick. He nodded at the wallet. Find a treasure, preacher. Depends what you call treasure. He leaned over, saw the bills. $2. You're rich. And a note. He grinned. A love letter. Not that kind of note. I handed it to him. He squinted at the writing, then whistled softly. Sounds like someone owed you a thank you. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I owed them. He shrugged, dropped it back into my hand. Either way, doesn't look like they're coming back for it. No, I said, but I think it found me on purpose. He gave me that look, half pity, half amusement. Everything's fate with you, Walter. Maybe it just blew out of a car window. Maybe, I said, but things that don't matter don't survive the rain. He grunted, lit a cigarette, and sat across from me. The smoke curled between us like memory trying to take shape. I stared at the wallet again. There was a faint indentation where a photograph might have been once. Whoever owned it had carried someone, maybe a child, a wife, maybe a memory that didn't want to stay hidden. I dried the bills near the fire, careful not to burn them. The note I slipped inside my coat, close to my chest. It didn't feel right leaving it alone. Later that night, when the city's hum had faded into the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own thoughts too loudly, I opened the wallet again. My fingers brushed against something rough behind the inner lining. A piece of paper glued by damp and time. I peeled it free. It was an old receipt, faded almost white, from a diner on the south side, Eddie's Place, printed in red letters. The date on it, October 21st, 2011. 14 years ago. Same week, the cold took my job, my home, and the last of my dignity. Same week, I stopped believing the city had anything left to give me. The handwriting on the back of the receipt was barely legible, but I could make out 2 words scrawled in blue pen. Coffee. Mercy. I felt something tighten in my throat, because there was only one person I'd ever written those 2 words for. A girl, young, scared, broke. She'd come into the diner, where I was working nights, years before I lost it all. No money, no jacket, shaking from the cold. The owner told me to kick her out. Instead, I paid for her coffee. And when she started crying, I told her to take it slow, that mercy was free if you knew where to look. That was a lifetime ago. And the name she'd told me then, the one I'd almost forgotten, started to echo back from somewhere deep. Jenny. The J. I sat back, the fire popping quietly, the wallet warm in my hands. If this was hers, then she'd carried it for years. And somehow, after all that time, it had found its way back to me. The city doesn't do coincidences, it does circles. And I'd just stepped back into one. I stared at the note one more time before closing my eyes. For the man who once helped me when no one else did. The words burned softer than any flame I'd ever lit. And somewhere between the crackle of the fire and the heartbeat of the bridge above, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I'd find out what happened to Jenny. Because if this city had finally sent me a thank you, it probably came with a price. Morning came grey and restless, the kind of sky that doesn't bother pretending it might clear. I left before the city had finished waking, the wallet tucked inside my coat, close enough to feel like a pulse. The bridge behind me exhaled the sound of trucks and rain. Each step felt heavier than it should have. I didn't know where I was going yet, only that the road was pointing backward. Eddie's place, the name from the receipt. I hadn't thought about that diner in years. It used to sit on the corner of 5th and Roosevelt, small enough to miss if you blinked, but loud enough to smell from 2 blocks away. Coffee, grease, and the sound of people pretending to have somewhere to go. That was where I met her, Jenny. She couldn't have been more than 20 then. Pale, thin, eyes that never stopped checking exits. When I gave her that cup of coffee, she cried like she wasn't built to accept kindness. And after that night, she vanished into the fog of the city, one of 1,000 faces I thought I'd never see again. But she hadn't forgotten. Somehow the past had written my name on a note and mailed it back with $2 for postage. The walk to the south side was long, and the city along the way looked older than I remembered. Storefronts boarded up, streetlights blinking out of rhythm, faces buried in their own storms. When I finally reached the corner, the diner was still there, barely. The sign had lost most of its letters. Eretz PA was all that remained, glowing weakly through grime. The front window was cracked, but not broken, as if even vandalism had stopped caring. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old coffee grounds. A man in his 70s sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper that probably hadn't changed in years. He looked up when the door creaked. "We're closed," he said automatically. Then his eyes adjusted. "You're early." "Early?" I asked. "Breakfast crowd doesn't come till 7, he said, folding the paper. "Sit wherever. I'll put a pot on." I took a seat near the window, the one that used to fog up during winters. The stool groaned beneath me like it remembered. He poured me coffee, no questions asked. I thanked him. "Haven't seen you around before," he said. "I used to come here," I said. "A long time ago." He nodded, polite, uninterested. But something in the way he wiped the counter told me he remembered faces better than he admitted. I pulled the receipt from the wallet and slid it across. "You ever have someone named Jenny who came here about 15 years back, maybe worked nearby? She left this behind." He squinted at the paper, then at me. "Jenny," he murmured, "red hair." Laugh that sounded like she didn't trust it. "That's her." He leaned back, sighing. "Yeah, I remember. Sweet girl. Used to come by some nights. Always sat in that booth over there, near the heater. Said it made her feel safe." "What happened to her?" I asked. He hesitated, the kind of pause that tells you the story won't end soft. "She got out," he said finally, "at least for a while. Some guy came looking for her once, rough type, fancy jacket, didn't belong down here. She stopped coming after that." "You ever hear from her again?" He shook his head. "No. But last winter, A woman came in, older, tired. She sat in the same booth, ordered black coffee, left A20, and said it was for the man who bought her one when she couldn't afford it. Said if I ever saw him again, I should give him something. He bent down behind the counter, rummaged in a drawer, and pulled out a small envelope. Edges yellowed, corners soft. My name written on it. Been sitting here ever since, he said. Didn't think I'd ever need it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, 2 photographs. The first was of a little boy, maybe 5 years old, standing in front of a playground, holding a paper airplane. The second was of Jenny, smiling, hair streaked with grey, eyes softer now. On the back of the photo, in the same handwriting as the note, his name is Luke. Tell him mercy runs in the family. I sat there, unable to breathe for a second. The words blurred. She said she had a son, the man said. Didn't say where she was living, just that she'd moved on. But she looked free, like she'd made peace with something. Do you know where she went? He shook his head. Sorry, friend. She didn't leave an address, just said if you ever came back, you'd know where to look. I folded the photo carefully, put it back into the wallet. The $2 was still there, silent witnesses to whatever kindness was left between us. Thanks, I said. He poured more coffee, shrugged. Guess she wanted you to have closure. Or a reminder, I said. Sometimes they're the same thing. When I stepped outside, the morning had turned to drizzle. The streetlights were still on, glowing faintly against the fog. I stood there for a while, staring at the photo of the boy, at the note, at the wallet that somehow found its way home. Mercy runs in the family. The words felt too big for the air. If Jenny had a son, maybe she'd left him something more than a memory. Maybe this was her way of saying the world didn't end where I thought it did. But part of me still needed to see for myself. The man inside had said she looked free. But in this city, freedom and disappearance often wear the same face. I turned the photo over again, searching for any clue. There, faint, almost invisible, the name of a park scribbled in blue ink beneath the picture. Miller Park, Southside. I started walking. Miller Park was 3 bus rides away, the kind of place that doesn't make the news unless something bad happens. The air grew colder the farther south I went, as if the city was warning me to turn round. When I finally stepped off the bus, the sky was a dull grey sheet, heavy with the kind of silence that presses against your ribs. The park stretched out in front of me, empty benches, cracked concrete paths, a playground long forgotten. The swing sets squeaked, even without wind, as if haunted by the memory of laughter. I stood at the gate, the old metal arch, still faintly readable, Miller Community Park. The paint had peeled into flakes, falling like the last snow of a season that overstayed its welcome. The photograph of the boy, Luke, was still in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and held it next to the playground. Same slide, same crooked sandbox border, same graffiti scrawled across the concrete. The picture wasn't old, maybe a few years. That meant Jenny had been here not long ago. Maybe she'd brought him to play. Maybe she'd sat on that same bench over there, watching him build something out of sand and hope. I started walking through the park, eyes scanning for anything out of place, a name carved in wood, a jacket forgotten, any sign that someone still remembered this place. An old man was feeding pigeons near the basketball court, tossing breadcrumbs into the wind like prayers that no one asked for. I approached slowly. "Morning," I said. He glanced up, suspicious at first, then nodded. "Morning. You come here often?" "Every day. Birds don't like to wait." I smiled faintly. "You ever see a woman here a few years back? Mid-30s, maybe 40 now. Red hair, soft voice. Sometimes with a boy about 5 or 6. He scratched his chin. Red hair, huh? Yeah, think I did. Used to sit over by that oak tree, near the sandbox. Kid liked to chase the pigeons. Drove these fellas crazy. He chuckled softly, scattering crumbs. Haven't seen them lately though. Maybe a year or two. You ever talked to her? Once or twice. She was polite. Asked about the birds, said her son liked how they never seemed afraid. Then she said something I never forgot. What was that? She said, they fly away, but they always know how to come home. The words hit me harder than they should have. I nodded. Did she ever mention where she lived? He shook his head. No. But one time I saw her walking out that way. He pointed toward a line of old apartment buildings beyond the park fence. 3rd floor, green curtains. Only window on that side that ever had life in it. I thanked him, dropped a few crumbs into his paper bag, and started toward the buildings. The closer I got, the more the air changed. Heavier, denser. The smell of wet brick and rust lingered around the stairwell. The door was unlocked, of course. In places like this, locks were just a suggestion. Inside, the hallway was narrow, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The floor creaked under my boots, echoing up through the stairwell like ghosts rehearsing footsteps. On the 3rd floor, I found the green curtains easily, faded now, but still hanging. I hesitated before knocking. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Then I noticed an envelope taped to the door. My name written on it in black ink. Shaky, but unmistakable. I tore it loose, my hands trembling before I even knew why. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper and another photograph. This one showed Jenny and her son sitting by the lake. The boy was older, maybe 8 or 9, smiling wide, a kite string in his hand. Jenny's hair was shorter now, the red turning silver. On the back of the picture, a date, April 3rd, 2022. The note inside was brief. Walter, if you've come this far, you already know too much about me and not enough about yourself. I meant what I wrote on the note in the wallet. You were the first person who looked at me like I still existed. The world took almost everything from me, but that moment, that mercy, it stayed. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, but he's not. Luke's with someone good, a woman who took us in when no one else would. You'll find her at St. Helena's shelter on 14th and Oak. She knows our story. She'll tell you the rest. Jenna, I stood there, staring at the words until the ink started to blur. My reflection in the dusty glass looked older than it had a minute ago. The apartment behind the curtains was empty, but I could see faint outlines on the wall, a cross, a framed photo removed, dust patterns shaped like absence. She'd left quietly, like people do when they've already said their goodbye in another language. I folded the letter and tucked it into my coat, right next to the wallet. For a second, I thought I smelled coffee, faint, ghost-like, as if the memory of that first night still lingered in the air. I walked back down the stairs slowly, the echo of my boots filling the silence. Outside, the old man was still feeding pigeons. He looked up when he saw me. Find what you were looking for? Not yet, I said, but I think I'm close. He smiled, a kind of smile that carried both sadness and relief. That's how it always is, ain't it? I nodded and started toward the bus stop. The city stretched ahead, grey streets, old stories, endless noise. But somewhere in that noise was a thread leading to 14th and Oak, and I intended to follow it. I checked the photo again before putting it away. Jenny's eyes in that picture looked at peace, but there was something else there too, a question, maybe a warning. She'd left me a trail, but she also wanted me to see something she couldn't say outright. I didn't know it yet, but that letter was about to lead me to a truth that would break me more than her death ever could. The bus to 14th and Oak took nearly an hour. I watched the city slide past the window, storefronts, graffiti, a group of kids playing soccer with a crushed can, a woman sleeping on a bench with a blanket made of newspapers. For every mile, I felt time peeling back, layer by layer, until only the part of me that still believed in redemption was left. Elena's shelter was smaller than I expected, a squat brick building tucked between two warehouses, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. A wooden sign above the door read, "St. Helena's Home, for those still trying." The phrase made me smile. The world doesn't make promises anymore, but sometimes it leaves hints. Inside, the air smelled of soup and detergent. Children's laughter echoed faintly down the hallway. Behind a counter, a woman in her 50s looked up, wearing the kind of smile that has learned how to survive bad news. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for someone." "She used to come here, Jenny." The woman's expression softened. "You knew her." "I think she knew me first." I handed her the photograph. "She told me you'd understand." She looked at the picture and pressed her lips together. "Yes," she said quietly. "She stayed here last year. She wasn't well, but she was strong. Stronger than she thought." She mentioned a boy. "Luke." The woman nodded. "He's here. Lives with one of our staff now. Good family." Jenny made sure of that before she passed. The words hung there, "before she passed." I'd expected them, but they still hit like a slow bullet. "How?" I asked. "She'd been sick for a long time," the woman said gently. "Didn't tell anyone until it was too late. She wrote letters, though. For him, for herself, and one for someone named Walter." She disappeared into a back room and returned with a small, sealed envelope. My name again, neat and steady this time. She said, "If you ever came, to give you this." I took it, my hands suddenly unsteady. "Thank you." The woman smiled sadly. She said you'd understand what it meant. I didn't open it there. I walked outside instead, into the soft drizzle. Across the street, a bench sat beneath a dying streetlight. I sat down and turned the envelope over. The paper was thin, worn, but whole, just like the woman who wrote it. I tore it open and began to read. "Walter, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, it means I've found peace in a way this city never could give me. I kept your words all these years. Coffee, mercy. I carried them like a shield. Whenever the world got cold, I remembered the man who gave warmth without asking for anything back. You told me once that mercy was free if you knew where to look. I spent the rest of my life trying to prove you right. Luke's safe now. He's everything good I ever touched. The money in that wallet, it isn't much, but it's what I had left the day you helped me. I held on to it, hoping one day I could return it. Not because I owed you, but because you deserved to know it mattered. If you ever doubt yourself, think of him. Think of the kindness that ripples further than we can see. You saved 2 lives that night, Walter, mine and his. I hope someday you'll forgive yourself as easily as you forgave me." Jenny, the words blurred as I reached the end. The $2 suddenly weighed more than gold. They weren't payment. They were proof. Proof that mercy doesn't vanish. It circles back, even after years of silence, finding you where you least expect it. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it beside the wallet, and looked up at the sky. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I stayed on that bench long after the rain stopped. The letter was still warm in my hands, the words sinking deeper with every breath. The streets around me hummed softly, cars passing in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. I kept reading the last line again and again. You saved 2 lives that night. It sounded impossible. I wasn't the kind of man people thanked. Not anymore. Not for years. But the paper said otherwise, and I had to believe at least one story about me still ended with light instead of smoke. Across the street, the shelter door opened. A woman stepped out with a boy, thin, wiry, maybe 10 years old, wearing a blue jacket that looked 2 sizes too big. He was holding a small red kite in one hand, the tail dragging behind him like a lost thought. The woman bent down, said something that made him laugh, then pointed toward the open space beside the building. The boy ran off, holding the kite up against the weak wind. It rose clumsily, jerking and spinning, but it flew. Something in me broke open right then. I crossed the street before I even decided to. The woman looked up when I approached. "You're Walter, aren't you?" she asked. "Jenny told you about me." "She did. I'm Carla. I run the children's program here. Luke stays with me and my husband." I glanced toward the boy. "He looks happy." "He is." Jenny made sure of that before she left. I nodded, the kind of nod that says too much and nothing at all. "Would you like to meet him?" she asked gently. My throat tightened. "Would that be all right?" "Of course." She wanted him to know about you someday. "I think today might be someday." She called out to him, "Luke, come here, honey." He came running, the kite trailing behind him. When he stopped, he looked at me the way kids look at strangers, curious but unafraid. "This is my friend Walter," Carla said. "He knew your mum." The boy tilted his head. "You knew my mum?" "Yes," I said softly. "A long time ago. She was my friend." He smiled, small, shy, but real. "She talked about you." "She did?" "Yeah. She said you helped her when she didn't have anything." He looked down at the kite. "She said that's why I like the wind, because it doesn't care where you start." I felt the air leave my lungs in a single rush. That was her voice, living through his. He held the kite up. "Want to see it fly?" I nodded, and he ran again, the kite lifting higher this time. The string hummed in the air. I watched him chase it across the yard, the sky turning gold behind the clouds. Carla stood beside me, arms crossed, smiling quietly. "She wanted you to have something," she said. She left it with me before she passed. From her pocket, she pulled a small silver key attached to a tiny tag. On it, in faded blue ink, "Eddie's Place, Locker 17. She said you'd understand." I took the key. It's metal cold against my skin. "I do." She said whatever was inside belonged to both of you. I thanked her, then looked back at the boy. He was laughing now, tangled in the kite string, sunlight hitting his hair in flashes of gold. He looked free. He looked like mercy with a heartbeat. When I turned to leave, Carla touched my arm. "You should come back sometime." He'd like that. I think I would too. By the time I got back to Eddie's place, the sky had turned the color of bruised copper. The diner was still open, a few people inside, the smell of coffee wrapping around the sound of forks and tired laughter. The man behind the counter recognized me instantly. "Back again," he said. "Yeah," I said, showing him the key. "Jenny left this for me." He squinted. 17's in the back. The lockers were old, rust-stained metal boxes lined up against the wall like forgotten soldiers. Number 17 sat near the end, dented but intact. The key fit perfectly. When I turned it, the door opened with a soft click, a sigh of air that smelled faintly like old paper and perfume. Inside was a small wooden box. I lifted it out carefully and brought it to a booth in the corner. The man watched me for a second, then looked away, as if sensing this wasn't the kind of moment you interrupt. The box wasn't locked. Inside, folded neatly, was another letter, my name again, and something wrapped in tissue paper. I opened the paper first. Inside were the 2 $1 bills, crisp and clean, not the ones from the wallet, new ones. On one of them, written in blue ink, were 5 words. "This time, it's your turn." I set the bills down and opened the letter. "Walter, if you're reading this, you found him. I knew you would. Luke's the best of us." He laughs easily. forgives quickly. He'll grow up knowing that even strangers can save you if they choose to see you. The first $2 I gave back were the ones you spent on me. But these two are for you. Not to spend, but to remind you that what you give always finds its way home. Maybe it takes years. Maybe it takes a lifetime. But it always returns. I kept a picture of that night. The diner window, the rain, your hands shaking as you handed me the cup. I wanted you to see it again. Not for guilt, but for grace. Thank you for teaching me that even a broken man can still be kind. J. Under the letter, folded inside the box, was a small photograph. It showed me, younger, tired, apron on, standing behind the counter of Eddie's place. Outside the window, blurred by rain, was Jenny, her face half lit by a streetlight, smiling faintly, holding that same cup of coffee. I hadn't known she took it. I held the picture until the edges bent under my fingers. The $2 lay beside it on the table, bright against the dull metal surface. Not money anymore. A message, a cycle. The proof that mercy never dies, it just changes pockets. The man behind the counter came over. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. "Better than I was." He looked at the photo, then at me. "She used to sit right there," he said, pointing to the booth by the window. Said this place smelled like forgiveness. I smiled. She wasn't wrong. He poured me another coffee, on the house. I sat there in silence, watching the steam rise and fade. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one, like stars remembering their purpose. When I finally stood, I left one of the clean dollar bills under the cup and walked out with the other in my coat. The wind met me at the door, cold and honest. On the corner, a man huddled under an awning, shivering, his hands bare and cracked. I stopped, reached into my coat, and handed him the last $1. He looked up at me, confused. "It's not much," I said, "but it's enough." He took it slowly, nodding. "God bless you." "Already did," I said. I walked away, the sound of the city soft behind me, the rain starting again, gentle, forgiving, familiar. By the time I made it back under the bridge, the rain had turned into mist. It clung to the air like smoke from a quiet fire, softening everything it touched. My small camp was still there. A few bricks, a blanket folded beside the barrel, the notebook I used to write names I didn't want the city to forget. The fire from earlier had died out, but the ashes still glowed faintly, stubborn, like they weren't ready to let go. I sat down slowly, the sound of the river beneath me steady and patient. The city above roared faintly, cars, sirens, the hum of lives moving too fast to see what they are running from. Down here, time was different. Time didn't run, it lingered. I took the last $1 from my coat pocket and turned it over in my hand. Jenny's handwriting on it, it faded slightly, but the words were still clear enough to read. "This time, it's your turn." I've thought about that a long while. I thought about the first time I met her, cold and frightened, clutching an empty purse, like it could protect her. About the way her hands trembled when I gave her that cup of coffee, and the way she whispered thank you, like it hurt to believe someone might mean it. I thought about how small that act seemed back then. A cup of coffee, $2, a moment of kindness too simple to remember. But now, sitting there with the mist pressing down and the sound of the river filling the quiet, I realized that nothing small ever stays small. It just takes time to grow into what it was meant to be. The wallet was beside me, dried now, its leather dark again. Inside were both letters, the photographs, and the other $1 I'd left unspent. I placed the wallet carefully on the ground beside the fire pit, not as something lost, but as something laid to rest. The air smelled of rain and old wood. I could almost hear Jenny's voice again, that soft tremor she had when she tried to sound strong. "They'd fly away," she'd said once, but they always know how to come home. The pigeons, the park, the boy, the circle. That's what mercy does. It flies, it leaves, it forgets, but somehow it always comes home. I opened my notebook, the one filled with the stories the world tries to bury. I tore out a blank page, smoothed it on my knee, and began to write. My pen scratched softly against the paper, the sound of ink finding purpose again. $2, 1 cup of coffee, 1 act of mercy. 15 years later, the world gave them back to me. Not as money, not as apology, but as proof. Proof that the smallest kindness survives longer than regret. Proof that even a man sitting under a bridge can still be found by the light. I closed the notebook, tucked it back into my coat, and watched the sky. The mist had lifted slightly, revealing the faintest glow of dawn. The light bounced off the river, catching on puddles, glass, and the wet asphalt, tiny fragments of gold in a city made of grey. I reached for the old tin cup beside me, filled it with rainwater, and poured it gently over the ashes. The steam rose in twisting ribbons, like whispers escaping from a secret. "Good night, Jenny," I said quietly. "You made it home." I sat there a little longer, until the city above began to wake. Footsteps, engines, the familiar rhythm of people pretending not to see the sidewalk beneath them. Somewhere, in one of those cars, a boy named Luke was probably on his way to school. Maybe he'd look out the window and notice the rain. Maybe he wouldn't, but I hoped he'd remember what his mother told him about the wind. That it doesn't care where you start, only that you keep moving. I smiled, pulled my coat tighter, and felt the weight of the wallet one last time before setting it down near the fire. Not heavy, not empty, just right. The bridge groaned softly as a truck rolled overhead, shaking dust loose from the beams. The sound echoed like a heartbeat. "My name is Walter Gray," I whispered, the words familiar but truer than ever. "And I'm the voice on the sidewalk." The fire crackled once more as the wind swept through, catching the edge of one of the photographs. It lifted slightly, fluttering against the damp air before settling again, right beside the last ember, glowing like a promise. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel cold.